Hey there, Marina.
Hello.
Hey, we'll give the customary 5 minutes before we kick things off.
Did you have something you wanted to discuss about the OCI thing, or did you want to put that off for future?
Yeah, I don't think it's really formed complete enough in my head. And I was also chatting with Steve. As soon as I mentioned that, Steve jumped in on a DM to me. I was like, what do you want to talk about? So there's some other people that have been pushing out various topics out there on this one. And so feels like there's some development over there, but nothing really, not worth taking the time today, I don't think.
Okay, yeah. I think it mostly depends on the OCI folks as well. So it's hard to say.
Yeah. Dropping the HackMD link out there for everybody. I'm sure most people here already have that one bookmarked.
Hi, everyone.
Oh.
Hello, hello. Happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday. Okay, I still see the single agenda item. All right.
Yeah, I fear we'll give people another like 2 minutes or so to join in, and then
yeah, that's
we were talking about just looking at this at a high level. You didn't want to go line by line on this one. Sound like?
Yeah, I think so. This isn't authored by me. This is authored by one of the Microsoft engineers, but he's in a different time zone. So I've had a read of this, put in some comments. I think we expect a revised version of this. I think there's mainly things like diagrams and some more examples and details will help. I was hesitant reviewing this because those details aren't present and we could interpret the same thing in different ways, and we'll end up spending time just discussing our picture of what it looks like. So I expect the next revision of this to have like examples and diagrams, which makes it really clear how the like the image manifest, how the signature manifest, and how the signature blob are related. What are we actually including in the signature, etc.
I actually have a couple questions about the requirements section, because I know that, like, as you said, I don't want to go into the other section before it's finished, and yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
but,
sorry,
I do have some questions about the requirements themselves, which I think might help inform the later section of the document.
Yeah, I'll just set some context. I think we have the OLR. I don't mind going through the doc. Everybody's spending time and putting in feedback all across the board, higher level feedback and specific feedback. I think that'll definitely help in getting the document revised.
Yeah,
but I'm just calling out that there are some sections of the document that I won't be able to answer. I'm still waiting for another version to come out.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I think that we can all acknowledge that it's a work in progress, and that's totally cool. But yeah, I do think that there's still some room for discussion just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Sure, yes.
Moving forward. Yeah, I thought we can give people some time to read, I guess. And then because I do have some questions, but I don't want to jump into it too early.
And I think Dan also said he'll join today. All right.
Yeah. But I think we've had the customary 5 minutes. So if you want to go ahead and jump in, Melinda, and start walking us through your thoughts on this one, at least guide us on the high level. And you're back on mute in case you were talking.
Sorry. All right. been talking to myself. Um, okay, so I'll give a status update. I think last 2 weeks or so, uh, I've been on call. Some of the other engineers have been on call. There hasn't been much progress. Uh, we've started picking up different topics. I think I gave a list of topics. The initial topics were like signature format, trust stores, and trust policies. There's also a extensibility uh, document that I'm working on. I think as we flesh out some of the details in the first three areas, it'll kind of become clear where are all the areas where we need any extensibility hooks. That's kind of a general outline of things where we are focusing. And on the signature format, right now the document lays out. There's a bunch of requirements. I think we need to be really critical on the requirements, and or it'd be great to see all kind of feedback in there. And there's an evaluation of few signature formats and the recommendation at the end. Like I said, there's still early draft. I think there's a lot more data that needs to go into it before. I think the recommendation can change, but I'm open to hearing everybody's feedback. So I guess we can spend, I don't know, we can spend next 20 minutes or so, take a time check on like if everybody's done, and we have half an hour or so to discuss. Does that sound good?
Works for me.
All right. Yeah, put the link in the chat.
So since there are only a handful of us here, do a quick time check, see if people need more time or if we're ready to start discussing. See one thumbs up from Marina. Feel free to use reactions or just jump in, unmute, and say if you need an extra minute or two.
I think I'm good.
All right. I think Melinda, go ahead and jump on in unless anybody screams.
Yeah, I'll share my screen and then we can talk through various topics.
Perfect.
All right. I think let's talk about high level before we get into comments. I think Marina had some points and maybe others as well.
Yeah, so I think my biggest high level comment, first of all, I think there's a great overview of a lot of different options here, which is really appreciated. But yeah, so my biggest concern really is a couple of the requirements, specifically the way the signature algorithm is decided, and that being in unsigned metadata or signed metadata before it's verified, because either way, there's been a number of attacks, especially on the JWT format, but they've been based on the fact that you use the algorithm, a different algorithm than the one you signed. For example, elliptic curve keys are generally pretty short. So if you have an elliptic curve signature, but then the algorithm type is listed as RSA or something, that then becomes a really short RSA key, which is then very problematic. And so for that reason, I feel like it would be better to, instead of including the algorithm type in the payload at all, it should be included when you learn the public key. So when the public key is distributed, the algorithm should be a part of that key distribution process instead of part of the verification process, so that the algorithm distribution can be secure as well. That's, I think, my biggest kind of concern here in the requirements section. If there are any thoughts about that?
I think that, yeah, that sounds like a valid concern. I think what's missing here is, and we probably need to start defining the validation to the signature format and the validation kind of go hand in hand. So I'll probably be working on that. There are a few other topics that I wanted to go to first, but I think the signature format and validation, if we have them side by side, it might make sense to, it might help finalize and see the whole picture together. Do you guys agree?
Sure.
I kind of think it's a definite concern, but it's not a concern we should be in the business of fixing. Like, let's just choose a format that does this well. We shouldn't be inventing a new one.
Yeah, I agree, actually.
Notary is not.
I was actually going to argue that I think some of the signature options below actually solve this problem. I just think that's one of the requirements we should consider when picking a signature format more than anything. I kind of agree with reinventing the format. So yeah, I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, I think a lot of the requirements goes into what we're signing, and so I'm still comfortable talking about requirements because I'm also in agreement with that we probably shouldn't be reinventing the wheel here. So the other two areas that got my attention in the requirements was the origin section and a little bit around some of the timestamp stuff, just thinking that we might be jumping the gun for how we want to handle revocation before we really went through that decision process outside of this. I think we were debating that one earlier in some of the other PRs. And so this feels like we've already made a decision and then kind of picked the solution before we even know what decision we wanted to make.
I think that makes sense. So I left feedback here. I think we need to separate out what goes into the signature versus what are the attributes we want from the signing format. I think that separation isn't clear here. There's some mixing of those. And I see a bunch of good questions around, like all the questions that you added. It's mainly details around some of these assertions and being able to justify or add data there.
Yep.
Yeah, I also added, I think, a few clarifications to the secure systems signing thing as well, because I think I had there were some questions there that I think, but again, I think that we can figure that out as we go, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Were there any other high-level comments before I go through each one of them, and then we can pick ones which we feel we want to discuss in detail. Otherwise, we'll skip over.
I did kind of skim over real quick when I was talking about, but the artifact origin, the concern that I have on that is that it somewhat implies that you care about where this came from. And
yeah.
And that also goes against the concept that we're supposed to be making this stuff portable. And so if you really want portability, you shouldn't care about the origin as much. You should just care that was this thing signed by a key that I've told I trust for the location I pulled it from. And then where this thing was signed upstream doesn't matter to us.
Oh, that's probably my fault, but I'm not quite clear what's the scope of this document. We've been talking about those questions like using the wrong version of MySQL, and that needs to be expressed somewhere, but I don't know whether it's a part of this spec or something entirely different.
So is that maybe an attempt to sign tags? Is that where you're getting at?
Yeah. I mean, I think we need to sign tags, and we need to sign, I think we've talked about it as a worldwide identity, but that's not exactly the origin.
Yeah, and so that if we're talking about signing tags, maybe we need to say that we need to have a way to sign the tag and then define what that looks like. I don't know, because yeah, the artifact origin means something different to me, but that's also a very valid requirement there for the tag.
So the artifact origin is talking about I think either we need an example there, but it's either the registry or the repository. I think the repository URL. And I think my question there was, we probably don't even have that when signing occurs on client side. The workflow in my mind seems like you build, you sign locally, accessing your private key in some secure manner or off machine signing key. And then you push it to the repository. So the repository or the location is actually decided after the signature is created. So that is one. And there may be cases where registry providers may have like value added signing services that they provide on top, so that if you push to repository, you configure it in a certain way, the registry operator will add that signature. In that case, that seems something appropriate, but I think we need to define that better. And again, in the trust decisions, we haven't talked about the origin or where it comes from being a part of the trust decision. It's purely on the signature and the identities that we trust those signatures to come from.
Yeah, and
I wonder.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to jump on the tag real quick. We say that the payload must contain a descriptor. I wonder if we want to say in there it must contain a descriptor and an optional list of potential tags. And then that tag list can be the way you can verify the tag and check it. And that's optional, but it's also a list. So you might have the thing tagged as more than one tag name at that point. So you might say it's version 3, but also 3.1.
I think that's fair.
Sorry, Marina, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, as you were saying earlier, I think that anything that's like in the payload itself, I feel like maybe is important and we need to talk about, but I don't know if it's part of the signature envelope piece of the question. But I don't know exactly where that break falls, which is part of the tricky thing about the way we've been separating this out. But I think that's definitely something that we can work on either here or separately.
So Brandon, I didn't understand how the or why the tag should be included and how that information will be used.
So when you sign artifact, you're saying, okay, I'm going to sign digest 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Theoretically, at that point, you might already know that this is going to be such and such of a tag that you're going to push up to the registry. At that point, you might know that you're already going to push version 3 and 3.1 and dash Alpine, whatever you tag this thing with. And you may want to include that as part of your payload of what you're signing so that someone that verifies this and says, hey, I just pulled version 3. Let me check the signature on this thing. The signature comes back and says, yes, it's signed. Yes, it's signed by this entity. And also that entity said that this was a valid tag for version 3.
Yeah, keys are typically very long-lived because key distribution is hard. So you will have a single key for the vendor that is valid for many years. And in that time, they will release 5, 10, 20 versions of that product, or maybe a new version every day. And you don't want an attacker to just be able to switch between them and give the ultimate consumer an old vulnerable version when the consumer is asking for a new version.
Yeah, I'm leaving that up to the
something,
signer to decide that.
I'm
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I was leaving that up to the signer to decide that, to say, now we have a new version for 3.2 that came out. And I'm leaving up to the signer to say whether or not they want to tell their end users that the old version 3 digest that was out there is no longer valid. They must update, and maybe they don't push that on the users. Maybe they tell the users that they can trust either of those images, they're both fine. And so I was leaving that decision of whether or not they revoke the old signature and push a new one for the 3.1 to be a signer decision.
Yeah, revocation is a separate and harder requirement. I guess the soft one, the minimum one, is that if I sign something as the January 20 release, and that's never going to change, the user should be able to get exactly the January 20 release. Being able to revoke and move tags, that's useful, but that's even harder than this.
Yeah, which is why I wasn't trying to solve it entirely, but leaving it up as a decision that the person doing the signatures might want to do. Just because I think there are not a lot of scenarios where they care that much. I think they only care when something breaks in the old 3.1. There's a vulnerability. They want to say, hey, we know we told you that this was version 3 before, don't use it.
So you're saying it'll validate, but that is additional metadata that a consumer can use to put in additional checks.
Yeah, so I'm saying that when you pull Alpine version 3 from the registry, you download it and you get a descriptor and digest and all that stuff. You'll go out and verify the signature that was on the object. And so you'll probably verify the signature on the descriptor. And as part of that verification, you might want to check, did that thing I verified, was that also version 3, or did somebody just throw something, swap something out under me and give me version 1 that has had all these vulnerabilities for all this time, and we knew that was a vulnerable thing. So just knowing the tag wasn't swapped out and replaced with a different one, that was part of our tag signing requirement that we were talking about, some of the other PRs. So I'm seeing that as probably something we want to include as one of the requirements in here as some of the content, but I'm not dictating how we include it. I'm just saying that it probably should be included somewhere.
So there are, I put in a requirement around, do we support customer defined metadata? And I'm trying to figure out whether tags will be kind of fall in that bucket, because what that set of metadata means that those are signed but are not part of Notary V2's verify trust workflow or the trust decision. There are additional signed metadata that you can use after the signature is verified to do any custom logic that you want.
Yeah.
So like, I want to be like clear on what gets baked into or what are attributes that Notary V2 considers when doing verification versus what set are additional metadata that is just passed on and can be used to do any custom logic.
Yeah, the biggest risk if you don't do any tag signature checks is that someone can push a tag that is signed, but just has, it's old, it's got known vulnerabilities. For whatever reason, they're just pushing something on you that was never even trusted as the version X for that thing. And so maybe they're pushing a debug image in place of the stripped down image. And so now you have all this debugging tools that you didn't expect to be included in the thing you're deploying to production. There are, a dozen different options for how this could potentially be attacked, but that was one of the concerns with signing the tags. And so I would want to have something in here that really does check. I don't want to make it an optional thing. If you include and say it and somebody's pulling by the tag, I want that to actually be something that I verify.
Yeah, I feel fairly strongly about this one as well. I don't care where it lives or how it's called, whether it's an annotation or a field spec, but it should be something that's part of Notary and that has a well-defined semantics, and most importantly, that is interoperable across vendors. So that Red Hat can define Red Hat's extension, but we want this to work across vendors so that Microsoft and Google and everyone else can sign images that can be verified with the tags, and it all works.
I think, Brandon, if you can add more detail, I think that will help out. Specifically, I haven't thought about this in depth because we had tag signing as a separate effort, probably a follow-through effort. And I expected some of the, when you fetch by tag, being able to have protections in that workflow through that effort. But I would like to, is there existing set of requirements or wherever where we expand on this?
Yeah, the requirement is out there.
One of them. But there was a lot. Brandon probably has a better list.
Yeah, there was a requirement out there that I'm pretty sure we got accepted a while back. We can dig that one up. I threw the comment over there on the payload, the descriptor field there. I think you might have that one up here. Your screen's kind of small, so I'm looking at my big screen here.
Oh, all right. Let me better.
Yeah. So yeah, and you are right that this was tag signing was something we had decided to push off to a later, one of the later proposals. I mention it here just because it may be something that's so fundamental and baked into what we're signing that it might make sense just to put the field in there, even if you don't verify it yet, and then have the verifying part come as a later one of the prototypes.
Cool. I think a related question to the larger group is we are like Notary V2 is gonna be signing only, I think there's a pretty fundamental question, only container artifacts. Is it like, for example, it's aware of tags and descriptors, etc., which are very OCI and container specific concepts?
So I think the answer is no, it's not just container images. So it's also, they're thinking about signing SBOMs and other kinds of artifacts that might get pushed up to a registry.
Right, but the umbrella is things that live in a OCI
Yes.
compliant registry, not arbitrary content.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's generally been the scope here, and we can talk about that, but that's been my understanding for sure.
Okay, just double checking on that because that'll go a lot into how much we can bake into versus not. All right, I'll go through some of the comments if there's more to cover. Talk about tags. Okay. Please stop me if we need to have more detailed discussion.
I think this is what we talked about with the origin.
Yeah. I'm comfortable that we hash this one out pretty hard on my side. So the parts I want to talk about now is getting into the existing formats.
Yeah, then I guess the revocation, I feel like that's part of that same problem where we don't know revocation yet. So I don't really know that this requirement makes sense until we know what the requirement is.
Yep.
But that's,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah, I guess we can generalize it for now so that we can make progress saying whatever revocation metadata is needed. And I think it need not be explicit here, like the at least for the artifact level, yeah, it was explicit. It's not there in the certificate. We can just say whatever metadata is needed to support artifact level revocation. We have a section down here where we'll talk about PKCS 11. That will be flushed out.
So JWT, when we look at that one, I feel like we really quickly pushed against it with a whole lot of cons there where some of them I felt might have been a little unfair on JWT.
I think there have been historical vulnerabilities with implementations of JWT. I don't know if that's a fundamental problem or if it's just a hard thing to get right. But which I think a lot of these relate to implementations of JWT that have had issues. I don't know if, yeah, for what they're worth.
Yeah, and I think some of the cons there was very much talking about, this implementation has this concern, this implementation. And we're at the point now that we can decide what implementation we want to use. So we shouldn't be picking on any one of those.
Well, at the same time, there kind of is the PHP problem, like where you don't want to invest in an ecosystem that contains too many bugs just because it attracts people who don't notice those bugs.
I feel like I'm being
It's
singled
kind
out.
of unfair, but it's not entirely impractical, I would say.
Oh yeah, this one here, I did want to talk about the that second con for the SSL spec. So that's just the thing I was talking about earlier, where you're supposed to distribute the algorithm with the key so that it can't be compromised by including it in the envelope. I think that was the idea, which I don't think that involves brute force. That's just having a different configuration.
Yeah, I didn't know enough detail here, but it seemed like the verifier tried multiple algorithms and it wasn't clear why that was. We can ask for more details here.
I mean, yeah, I can thank you to the thread in GitHub that I was part of talking about that exact issue in that spec, and that's the that was the resolution, was that the algorithm should be determined not by the signing envelope, but by the delegation.
Yeah, and there is a Go implementation that I wrote and reviewed parts of.
Cool.
So it's not. A payload format, not a signature format.
Yeah, because I don't think this one actually includes the signed section, right?
Right. This is the thing that you sign representing the image, not the thing you wrap up the signature in. If you scroll back up to the top of this proposal, the idea is to replace it with a OCI descriptor instead of this thing. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think there's general agreement, and we would not want to reinvent the wheel, and of the options that we have, evaluate them more critically. And if we are able to restrict the usage and have things baked in the validation that are able to mitigate any of the cons.
Yeah, so
Sajay,
kind of, I was going to say real quick high level looking at this on the various implementations we were looking at. So I think safe to say we should probably pull out the simple signing one just because it's not a signing. And then if there are any other options out there for specs, you know, PKCS, if we want to add that in, stuff like that. And then, yeah, on the recommendations, I'm very opposed to reinventing wheels.
Sajay, you had a question there.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a current recommendation. Historically, we've looked at the PGP and at PKCA's number 7, just because those were the implementations where we've already had the reviewed implementations and paperwork around that, but that's a Red Hat specific concern, and I am not involved in that site anymore, so I don't even know what the options would be right now.
Cool.
Yeah, I think one good thing that's coming out of the discussion is that folks want an existing format, right? But I would also like to make sure we kind of at least have a separate document for the payload format, because the client tools post signature validation, the trust policy would heavily depend on the payload itself, right? Like, is this tag here, is this digest this one, and things like that. So should we split out the document as a separate payload format for the signature itself, and this is just the envelope discussion?
That makes sense to me. Yeah, because I think there's a lot of pieces about what should be included in the payload itself, which are important discussions, but I don't know if they're super relevant to the envelope and the way we actually just format the signature on top of that.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me. They kind of interact, like if there is expiration in the existing envelope, then we can just use that bit without adding it to the payload, but those are minor concerns. I think splitting them would be much cleaner.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense to me. The one thing I'm kind of front and center of my mind right now is when we talk about the envelope and signing, one of the things I know we've kind of gone back and forth on was whether we want to have like a timestamp authority, a TSA, to take a short-lived key and turn it into a long-lived key, and just other concerns about how you deal with workflows that use short-lived keys for the individual steps and then promoting it into a long-lived key when we do the signing of this stuff. That's been front and center of my mind lately. And so I don't know if that fits perfectly in here, but might help to think about how that might be implemented depending on which envelope format we use.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a question of whether, because it depends a little bit on the timestamping system, whether that should be part of the unsigned envelope format or part of the signed payload format, depending on the way the timestamping is done. Like if it has its own signature and stuff, it doesn't need to be in signed metadata, and that can be helpful. But if we're just defining a time in it, that'll need to be in the signed payload. I don't know if it's definitely something we should think about here, but I don't know if that's something we need to decide before we decide this or whatever. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, as long as it's a supported option with whatever format we pick. I don't know if it needs to be specified, but just the ability to do it is nice.
Well, it's mentioned above in the requirements, but I think Marina's point is that it's confusing because there's two different timestamps people care about in this space. The timestamp on the signature, which I think is the one you were talking about, Brandon, and then also like expiration style timestamps that would be inside of the payload.
I think they go a little bit hand in hand, because we'll have a timestamp that is made by some kind of short-lived key that is going to therefore be invalid as soon as the key goes expired, or should be theoretically. And then you use something like a TSA to theoretically extend that. But then there is that question of, okay, well, if the TSA key doesn't expire ever, then that's a different issue. You just create a way to turn a very short-lived signature into an indefinitely linked problem. And so something in here might need to be added in. I don't know where or how to put some kind of limit in there to say that, yeah, we can turn a short-lived key into a long-lived key with limits.
So the signature expiry time is specifically for that. So the signature expiry time is may not be related to the key expiry. It is like for this signature, this is the absolute expiry time.
Yeah, I think we've had other places we've looked at where we said that the expiration of what we signed happens either when the key expires or the signature itself that you created expires. And it should be the sooner of either of those, because you don't want a short-lived key that expired after 6 weeks to be able to put out some content that could be trusted for 6 years.
Right.
So there is a question of how to implement that to handle some of the workflows where you have these very short-lived keys, something that lasts for 5 minutes for a build step that goes through. And how do you make that something that transitions into something that where you say, okay, we do actually trust this to be out on our repository for a long period of time than that key lived for.
So I think at least 2 of the cases are covered here, but I think I see one missing. So what you described is the key validation period, the key expiration period. There's the signature validity period, and then there's the TSA option. So I think the one that's missing here is the key expiration. That makes sense because we're talking about the signatures, not the keys right now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But this one covers you can have a timestamp inside a protected timestamp, and then you have the signature itself gets timestamped, and then by necessity that has to be outside the metadata because you can't put it inside because you timestamped the signature itself.
Yeah, and the challenge is, how do you define those limits? Is that something where when you generate that short-lived key that the CA or something like that says, okay, here's a key, it's going to last for 5 minutes, but it's allowed to sign something for up to 2 years? Or is it, where do you specify that? How do you specify that?
So the up to the 2 years is what the signature expiry was supposed to specify.
Yeah, but if that's something that the person doing the signing can specify, that's not good. Because you can have a key that lasts for 5 minutes and they're just going to make up whatever time that they want to make up.
Well, so that's what the TSA is for.
But the TSA just says this was signed at a certain time, right? They don't actually put any restrictions on it saying that, yeah, the thing was signed then, but it can't last longer than X, right?
I'm not sure I'm understanding. So if you get a
The
key,
the TSA is basically to extend, or like in a trustful manner, extend usage of the signature beyond the key expiry. So the TSA basically validates that the point at which signature was generated, the key was valid.
Yeah, the attack scenario I'm looking at is if you have a key that lasts for 5 minutes and it gets compromised by a malicious actor in there that gets into the build system. I don't want them to be able to say, I'm going to sign this thing and the expiration time on that is now 10 years. I don't want them to be able to say that if I've generated that short-lived key and I think, you know what, the worst I want to have is have that only last for 6 months. And so I want
to. Okay.
Yeah,
but I think that probably gets into the revocation bucket, because signature expiry, the explicit signature expiry was specifically for, I have a key, I'm signing something, and I want to indicate, independent of the key validity, what the lifetime of this specific signature should be. And I think in most of the cases that means that signature expiry is inside of the key expiry period, But I think you're pointing to a case where with short-lived keys, you can use this to be beyond. And I think we haven't probably talked about this specific use case and whether it's a correct usage of that option.
Yeah, you might be right there. That might go into the revocation.
All right, we have, sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just saying, it's all a little bit connected, but I think that as long as we're okay with iterating on this, I think that we can just see where the revocation conversation takes us on that and
Cool.
possibly iterate this as that's decided.
We don't have the PKCS fleshed out, but I wanted to hear if anybody had strong opinions for or against it.
I've used it recently, and this starts to couple back with the existing timestamp authority systems, the TSAs, the RFC 3161 system use PKCS 11 or PKCS 7 heavily, and it's terrible as far as I can tell. I don't like it at all, but I don't have any quantitative or qualitative stuff other than the Go clients are all really terrible and only do parts of it, and it's needlessly complicated.
Okay. Yeah, we
I
have
think-
also used it in limited use cases where with specific libraries that have good support. We haven't had any objections against it, but like I said, we use it in very, very specific signing scenarios. I think somebody else had something.
No, yeah, I mean, similarly, it's the same consensus that tooling is really hard for PKCS 7 to get it right. I think the complexity should be called out for PKCS 7, but if not that envelope, it would be great to kind of get some straw man of these are the potential envelopes we would like to go down, so that maybe the next call or the few future calls we can probably like discuss pros and cons of both as well.
Cool.
Does PGP belong on the list of possible options?
It's probably worth analyzing as an option.
I looked at I think there was an issue where Dan responded with a link of all the downsides. That looks like a pretty big
Yeah,
list,
I mean,
especially with all the compatibility options and kind of baggage that it's accumulated over
Yeah.
the years. I
think
think we would,
I'm fine not saying that I'm fine saying we don't want to use it. I'm just wondering if we want to just kind of throw in a list of saying, yeah, we considered it and it's bad.
that totally makes sense. Yeah, for completion's sake, to be included in the document.
Since that conversation and that issue, the Go crypto library has also officially deprecated the PGP support. So they're not really, it's there, it's not going to be maintained, it's not going to be improved. So you'd have to move from like the official Go crypto stuff to something else that doesn't exist yet too. It's another.
Sounds like a
reason
long
not
list
to.
of cons on that one then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we turned a one bullet meeting into a full hour here. And so next week we're looking at basically iterating on this. Is that the plan?
Yeah, iterating on this, and hopefully I should also have another document that we can review. And I do know we have the rescinding signatures update from my side, so I need to submit a pull request. Did Marina's content get published?
No, I think I don't have merge abilities, and so and I think Steve didn't merge them either. I think we do need more people with merge abilities in that repo, but that's a separate thing.
Yeah, that is separate.
So, but yeah, I think they're just pending that basically.
Okay, so some of the, I don't know what you call it, administrative or protocol related, I think we need to bring them up, because as we get into, there's going to be like an explosion of documents and PRs. We need to make sure we build consensus and put incremental content, commit incremental content into the repository.
I think there is consensus among all of us that are trying to get stuff approved that, yeah, we need to get something in there.
All right.
Yeah, and I think that if we just have more maintainers, but then maybe require 2 approvals to merge or something like that, I think that should be a nice compromise just so we can get things going.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think
Should
any
we
of us
put
here-
that on the agenda next week?
Yeah, I don't think any of us here have
Yes.
the power to make that happen, but that would be a great thing that to do.
Is it just Steve?
Steve and
It's
Justin
even
Cormack.
Justin. Yeah, Justin.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, Steve should be back next week.
That makes sense. I'll add it in the agenda. What should I call it?
Mergeability, governance, something like that.
We could also just maybe we could just ask Steve to add it next week.
Is
Slack.
he back from vacation
Yeah, he'll be
next
back
week?
next week, I think.
I think he'll be
Okay.
back next week.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, thanks everybody for your time.
Thank you, Melinda.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.